So welcome, Chad, to Being Christ's Presence. It's just an incredible honor for me. I just remember so many fun conversations with you. Let me introduce you a little bit to this group first, because not everyone has had the privilege that I have had. But you currently work for the YMCA of San Francisco, and you are doing, you're the senior vice president of strategy, equity, and impact. It's a lot of big words. I know how much you love to catalyze change and to strategize and just inform people of where we could be, where we are. You like to look at, the community, your grassroots, and yet you're a big thinker. And I just have appreciated that a lot. And before that, Chad actually worked for YUSA for 10 years. And he also was working in the global diversity, equity, inclusion team. Did a lot of incredible work. A lot of people know you because of that. Again, you were bringing strategy, all sorts of thinking, but you're also just so present with people in their questions. And I've just appreciated that about you so much. Even before that, you worked in New York, Greater New York. Is that right?
Wow.
Yeah. So you've done a lot different things. I mean, in New York, it was very focused on global exchange. So you've had this global mindset for a long time. So you understand the movement from a lot of dimensions. And now you're in a local YMCA in San Francisco. So we're just thrilled that you took time with us, and excited to hear what you have to say. And I remember when I first really had a good conversation with you and got to know you a little bit, I was honored. We were in Florida at a U.S. Mission Network conference, actually, probably 5-6 years ago. And I just remember the conversation being so rich and honest about where you're at and where the Y is at, and your journey with Christianity and other faiths, and how you saw the YMCA movement. You really inspired me to think bigger and deeper. And so I just appreciate you being on here, because I have a feeling that's what you're going to do for us today. So I have a first question. Could you share something about your Y story, as well as kind of your faith story, and how those two, have intersected on some level?
No, absolutely, Janele. And it's an honor to be with you all. I see so many friends, familiar faces. I do feel like this is a bit of a reunion. I think one of the things I miss about not being engaged in the national arena is the chance to interact with many of you and to have conversations like the one we're having today. So I'm honored by the invitation to be here. And Janele, you referenced, I grew up in the Y. I'm a Y kid. I joke that my mom dropped me off at the Y when I was 5 for summer camp, and she didn't really pick me up again because the Y raised me. Conversely, my first interaction and experience with faith, with the Christian faith in particular, was through the Y. For me, the acts, the values of caring, of honesty, of respect and responsibility, my understanding of the Christian faith was woven into the fabric of every interaction that I had from when I was 5, right? With that being said, Janele, as you know, my own faith journey in the past couple of years has changed. As often happens when crisis and loss and trauma comes, is we recognize and return to a deeper understanding of greater power, of the commonality of what unites us being stronger than what divides us. And so I do think that, I believe the Y movement is much like our nation. I believe that our Christian heritage has always been and must always be the foundation of what we are trying to do. For half of our movement, we see Christian faith as the foundation of our inclusion work. For half of our movement, we may take a humanist or secular approach. The beauty of the movement is one that allows for each individual to lead toward inclusion from whichever lens they feel authentic to themselves. I do believe where we step into some challenging spaces is when we prescribe to each other what we think they should do based on our lens, right? One of the most ironic things that happened was that when I was in New York, you mentioned that a friend of mine who was a sports director, I think, was told by his boss at the time to take the Bible off his desk because it was making people feel uncomfortable. I remember thinking, come again now? We're for all, but not for all, because what are we actually for? right? So if we move that type of a conversation to the future, what are the two things that we are probably all coached not to talk about at the dining room table? If you could humor me, what are they? What are the two things?
Yeah, put it in the chat. What do you think we can't talk about in the dining room table? That would be fair. Politics,
Sharon, yes. Sorry.
religion and politics.
Yep, 100%. And what are the two things that are probably at the crux of the biggest divides in our country?
There again, he's asking us a good question.
Right.
Politics and religion.
I think for most of us, it's the same. So if the why is literally the nation's dining room table, if we are striving to be center of community, how are we supposed to do that if we can't talk about the very two things that we all just agreed are challenging us the most, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I went off a little bit. Clearly,
No, it's good. You have a lot to say today, and we'll just go with where you go. It's totally fine. It's interesting to me, back to the little bit of your faith story, and you've told me a little bit about your background, even with your family. So you shared that the Y, was this Christian place for you, and you got introduced in that way. But this is a Being Christ Presence call. This is kind of focused for people that do maybe have a Bible on their desk, right?
yes.
And it's so honoring that you're here. I'm just wondering what really motivated you to accept this kind of invitation to talk, because I also know you're not a professing Christian, or at least the same way as many, right? I don't know, but what motivated you to walk into this faith conversation in the Y?
No, and I appreciate the question. I think, we oftentimes get it twisted in our Y work. We cannot be exclusive in what we name to be our inclusion efforts. We just can't. And the times when someone's dimension of diversity, be it ideology, identity, or faith, the times when that most challenges us, to me, is when we have to coach ourselves to lean in with trying to understand. I'm going to just go right to the core, right? As an openly gay man in the YMCA that served on the National Diversity Inclusion team, there are often times when I felt not welcome, but that was my stuff. You want to know the time when I felt the most welcome of any space I've ever been in? Was that meeting that we were at together, Janele, at the Chicago O'Hare Airport, right? Wes was organizing it. I think it was a product of work that Larry and Josh and Tim and so many others on the call here had pulled together. And I remember being so afraid. I forget the question. Something was framed, and I remember blurting out that I'm LGBTQ. I remember thinking that literally the chairs were going to part. That was my bias, my judgment. I thought I was going to be kicked out of the room and excommunicated, never invited back. That was my own crap, right? What happened in turn, I walked away with deeper friendships, deeper relationships, deeper love from people that I never expected. I even when I got a tattoo on my wrist to remind myself of my short-sightedness, that space where I thought I was going to be not welcome, I was the most welcome. Right? And so when I think about this invitation, to me, it's an opportunity to lean back into a space that I do believe we have to all work to reclaim. And it is not one that is polarized. It is one that is focused on love. It is one that is focused on understanding, and one that is focused on recognizing that we have to be the change that we're seeking in this ever polarized world. We have to be willing to engage with individuals who do not share our lived experiences, who we might not agree with, right?
Wow, Chad. I mean, for you to share kind of your revelation of your own bias, right? And you walked into a space that you had anticipation of a certain reaction, right? And then that didn't happen the same way as you thought, and that you were pleasantly surprised, which is good. It's better than the other way, right? And I guess I have a question about what you think some of the biases are that Christians might have of non-Christians, and the other way around in our movement. Like, what do you think some of those preconceived assumptions, there's tension. We have tension in our movement about this. There's tension in our country about faith diversity, interfaith, trying to find our identity. we are a Christian organization, we have Christian roots, how does this play out? So there's a lot to talk about, and we don't have a lot of ability spaces that we try to do that. What do you think gets in the way? Are there certain biases you've seen, or how would you describe that tension?
No, I think, and I'm guilty of this more than any, I think that when we make assumptions instead of asking questions, when we decide for people what their motivation is rather than seeking to understand, that is the root of bias. And to your point, it goes in all directions, right? I believe, from my understanding and my interactions with many of you on this call, that the Christian faith is not a monolith. So too is humanity not a monolith. I'll use a very personal example, because I may have had a interaction where someone that identified as Christian told me that I was going to hell because of my sexual orientation. I do not get to project that belief on everyone that is identifying as a Christian. I just don't. I get to hold my hurt. I get to hold the harm that I feel because of that, but I don't get to project that back out. Otherwise, I'm actually perpetuating the very thing that I'm saying I don't want to be done to me, which is the right to do it to others, right? Wow. It's to understand that is the grounding of that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're saying the fact that we're in tension probably comes from maybe our lack of muscle, really, to even ask questions for seeking understanding, right? I mean, that's really our way forward, instead of just saying, well, this just isn't reconcilable, right? But to lean in and try to recognize our assumptions or our biases. Is that what you're saying? It's
That's
a path. Yeah.
And sometimes you have to be open to learning in the moment, right? Like Tim, I see Ryan, I see Angie, Brenner, I see so many of you on this call that in the past I've had conversations with. And in those moments, each of you and others that I'm not naming, TJ, hi, there's learnings that I walked away with that enrich my own understanding of faith, of inclusion, of humanity. That if I had held to my bias, we would have never had those conversations. And Janele, I shared something personal with you as we're preparing for this. My own hesitancy of sometimes in the past engaging in spaces that are devoutly Christian, right? My own grandma passed away recently, right? And my grandpa, while holding her hand, recited the Lord's Prayer word for, I did not even know he knew the Lord's Prayer. And to have that awareness and that presence and that, forgive me, I felt like the hand of God or something just present there. Maybe, okay, what the heck was I? All these years, all my push-up, all my thought, all my assumptions, all my own bias, and my own family had that belief and that lens, and that was the love that grandma and grandpa shared to me, that welcomed my husband into the home in a way that literally at one point, grandma and grandpa used to joke, all right, Chad, Perm, my husband, he can stay, but you go to the hotel, Perm's good.
They were preferring your husband, huh?
Yes, which again, love all.
Yeah.
Is that not a founding principle of Christianity to my understanding? That's what my grandparents, I was blind. I didn't see the connection. It took grandpa reciting that.
Wow.
And grandma's last moments that helped me to realize that.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really incredible. And it's a really fresh memory. I'm sorry for the loss of your grandma. I know that's very significant for you and your family. And isn't it interesting in times of, transition or crisis or whatever, sometimes we find our deepest sense of our spirituality or faith or belief, maybe even for your grandpa, like maybe it kind of emerged again for him in that moment. Absolutely. But that's a beautiful story, and glad you shared that with us. Wow. I remember a phrase you told me, I don't know how many years ago, but we were talking about the Christian identity emphasis movement and trying to figure out how this diversity thing works with it. And you said, well, what would it look like? I wonder what it would look like, or could we possibly think about this of becoming an inclusively Christian and faith diverse organization. And I remember being super challenged by this adjective of inclusively Christian, or maybe that's an adjective, I don't know my grammar too well, but with the faith diversity. And I know you have diversity of faith even in your own family. So in your own family unit, you know how this works, right? On some level, or maybe how it doesn't work so well. But, we can't go back in time. We have lots of people that have different belief systems and perspectives and experiences within our movement. So can you unpack that a little? I don't know how much you've thought about that phrase, or maybe you have a different phrase now, but it was an intriguing phrase for me.
No, and I'm remembering our conversation, and also remembering some related dialogue with Josh and with Larry, and with Tim in particular and others here. I think I can't remember who, but someone, it might have been you, Janele, challenged me to ask, why do we have to put the word inclusive in front of Christianity? Isn't Christianity by nature inclusive? And I remember from the seat that I was sitting at the time, I remember saying something to the effect of, in an ideal world, yes, but in the current context, that may not be how some receive the word Christianity or the faith that is Christianity, because of how some humans have, perhaps with good intention, altered the understanding of many in our communities of what Christianity actually is. Right? So yeah, let's work toward a space and time where we don't have to say inclusive Christianity, where the word Christianity is inclusive by virtue of what we understand of our faith to be, right? And faith diverse. I mean, if we are seeking for the YMCA as a local entity, as a national entity, as a global entity, to be that thing that knits together the strands of our ever frayed social fabric, then we need to be able to lean into the aspects of any faith, including Christianity, that actually are common. Find me a religion, a faith, a spiritual practice that is not grounded in caring, honesty, respect, and responsibility, that does not believe in some type of salvation coming from acts of goodness, acts of love. Right? That's the part that I think, and I do think, right, in the why, we're just like our nation. So some of us are extremely triggered. We can't say that we're Christian because that's going to be exclusive. Well, thank you for that, and I understand and appreciate someone's reality, and many of my friends might feel and believe that, and at the same time, if the why is that thing, that space where we can all show up as our authentic selves, even and especially when our authentic selves bump into each other, we gotta be able to talk it through. I remember one time, Bob Hall, when he was still in Portland, I remember we were having a conversation. I think either he was taking me to the airport, I was driving, we were in a car, and he said something to the effect of, I think it's ironic, Chad, that, sometimes the very people that we may expect to be at odds with are the ones that extend hands toward us. I think he was meaning that as a compliment to me. And it's interesting because I also felt that to him. I actually had one of the most real conversations in that car with him about my own sexual orientation, how he felt about it. Like, we went real deep. I remember having to unpack it with Larry after to understand exactly what I was experiencing. But it wasn't easy. And I would assume, and Bob, if you're here, I've not asked you how you felt. I don't think it was easy for him too. But I'll bet we both walked away with a deeper understanding for each other. Because of that. Wow. Is Bob here? Because if so, that was really awesome.
No, I don't think he is.
I remember that conversation.
Bob Hall is here.
Okay.
We could unpack it more. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to go that route. Yeah. Thank you for all your examples of how incredible you've been at building bridges and extending your hand into kind of the Christian, I don't know, space, I guess, or places, people. I mean, it's been really incredible journey to be part of that with you, and you're definitely a great example of extending understanding and seeking understanding. Really appreciate that. How do you think, beyond maybe our daily interactions with people, which obviously is the foundation of all our work, but is there anything practical on a day-to-day basis that could really help our why hold both of these commitments of diversity, equity, inclusion, and our commitment to our Christian identity? Is there anything practical that you think of beyond extending understanding and seeking understanding? And it's okay if you don't.
No, it's a good question. It's also not on the ones that we prep for, so I'm just reacting in the last moment. I think that one I think it's to ask the question regularly of what it looks like for the people, the humans that make up our, what it looks like for them, what it looks like for each individual. I also think that sometimes it's going deeper into the perceived either or that I think exists. Somehow there's a narrative sometimes that we're focused on diverse, equity, inclusion, or Christianity. I don't know why it can't be both, right? If I mean, we, the Y, literally is the organization in the world since our inception that actually is grounded in the union of both, right? I also think, and I'm saying this recognizing that I am very hypocritical in my current seat in San Francisco. I don't do this as much as I used to at the national office, and I need to do more of it. But the other practical thing is to intentionally seek out spaces where people come from a different lived experiences, different faith background, different political ideology, different everything from what we are comfortable with, and leaning into that, right? And forcing ourselves to really listen, to hear the message, not coded by what we think they think, but actually hear the message and make that real human connection. I think that's one thing.
That's good. You've said such rich things. I know we need to end, which goes really fast. 25 minutes goes super fast, especially with Chad, at least for me. I have a closing question, a little more personal again, but I'd really like for you to share with us what is something that you would like people to know about you and your faith or spirituality, and how it is for you to work within this organization in that.
I think I'll start where I'll end where I began. I think my first exposure to faith and the Christian faith was as a kid through the Y. I think that my deepened connection to faith and the Christian faith has come because of you all, of the Y. When I think about spirituality and a higher power and religion and what I want it to be, inclusive, welcoming, love-centered, I think of human connection with so many of you on the line here, and the human connection that exists in our Y movement. So
good. Chad, you've done more than expected. Thank you for all your words, your heart, your vulnerability, your willingness to be with us today.